Happy to be spending some time at my parents' home in Manitoba right now. It's kind of an estate-ish and a lot more relaxed than my other life, despite the fact that my other life is very relaxed too. But getting some chance to read and not have to work. I want to tackle a very complex topic that I have been working with a friend of mine for a while, but when I speak with others that have been sort of familiar with many of these notions that I've brought up, I think have been left in a question as to why I keep bringing these notions up, and the kind of strength of the particular view that I have on it, and that is fusion technologies. And why I believe it is, in fact, sort of a fallout of the repressed sciences that have been taking place globally. To get to this at least with some substantiality, I think you have to point to a few different topics and then show how they probably are a fallout of this fact. So namely, we can look at the money changers themselves, that there are a group of fairly powerful people, and I wouldn't say it's a particular single group, but a number of probably competing factions, from the best I can tell, that have been working progressively and systematically to monopolize the wealth on the planet. And this is very well documented. I would point you to books such as Web of Debt and/or The Creature from Jekyll Island. Those two are probably the best in that regard. And they're just detailing how institutionalized the federal, quote-unquote, federal system of money exchange has been implemented, but not truly federal because it's properly private and controlled by a few people with intentions outside of the governance structure that we would typically see. So therefore there's a shadow government that is using these institutionalized systems that look federal, that look governmental, but are in fact private. So that's one part of it. The next would be to say, there's a regular meetup of these groups that have different levels of knowledge, and there's a consolidated effort to control the media structures of the planet by monopolizing and integrating vertically the many monopolies of information across the planet, so that it's very hard to get information across. Okay, and then also we have a fairly covert system of gathering that allows this information to get leaked out to very particular degrees. And so the precision of what I'm arguing for here is not exact, I would say, but nevertheless, I feel very confident in the general emphasis or gesturing of this particular argument. So therefore, when we get into things like science, which is very much outside of my academic expertise, although I've tried to particularly grasp general physics concepts, but not the mathematics behind them, we can see potentially how I would not be good for this, but nevertheless, I'm going to present a few arguments by others that make a lot of logical sense, I believe. That is to say that, like propositional logic, if A then B, which I can see A and B, then C is sort of a natural consequence of that. And likewise, I would say the physics construal makes to me natural sense. So, people like Joseph P. Farrell, for example, although I hold in question some of his alternative historical views, argues, I say, quite persuasively in some of his books regarding how Nazi technology, as well as others, this part's pretty well documented, how Nazi technology moved from Germany down into Argentina, and many of the people in Argentina were then recruited into places like NASA. And so the secret, quote-unquote, secret technology that was derived from the Nazi regime was passed along. Furthermore, a lot of these Nazis were following through with financial programs that were not available or made readily possible within, we'd say, the kind of global corporate economic agenda of the time. In other words, they actually shut out people like Rothschilds and Rockefellers from their financial system. They were trying to do something very similar financially with a very different intended consequence. As Abraham Lincoln and his greenbacks issued governmentally directly instead of being privately issued. I think they were called the Feach or something. Anyways, it was a government-issued currency, and so therefore it didn't have the debt attachment to it. So how they could deal with it on a global scale, because again, the power elite, the financial elite didn't want anything to do with them because they were cutting them off. They therefore just did barter with other countries, and in a certain sense, both the countries would win financially, or at least, how can I put this, resource-wise. Okay, so how does this fit into science and fusion technologies, really? Again, part of it I do think has to do with that sort of open source component that, okay, I'll get back to that, but so part of it has to do with the Nazi regime in the sense that they were working on technologies that were quite advanced and I think did get slipped through to the United States and then through the Nazi scientists. Again, that's less tenable because I don't see very good documentation for it. The other side of it is that open source systems are antithetical to what the elites are sort of pushing for. So in other words, sustainable systems are in exact contention to what they want, and that is a monopolization of power. And so anything that is sustainable, therefore, as a consequence, would be attempted to be hidden. And we've seen time and again in media efforts to hide these contrary views, these contrary sciences that are a little bit more mainstream. So you have a sort of blackmailing of these technologies, but yet I would say that there is a secret infrastructural desire to build them. Now, again, that's contentious, but again, it's a fairly good fallout, at least a very good possibility you can maintain in your head that they would nevertheless be conceiving and working on these structures so that they themselves could have better use of their monopolization, but it wouldn't be made public. We need not look very much further than a lot of the patents that were designed by battery makers and so forth that were super long-lasting and that had been kiboshed time and again by things like the oil companies. Again, a direct power threat to them, which are subservient, I would say, in general, to these even higher order systems of financiers. So when you get into fusion itself, you're looking at pretty much absolute free technologies, absolute, in other words, open source technologies. And like open source information, which is or an example of some informational freedom would be the internet sort of thing, although it is attempted to be, I'd say, and it is to some extent governed through the actual programming design, and we of course are governing ourselves as to what we deem is true and right, but and there's nothing wrong with that, but we're looking at how again these patents would get pulled down from the shelves and destroyed, and that's again for those very reasons, that when you have a fair level of industrial control, a fair level of informational control, a very high level of financial control in the world markets and so forth, then you can fairly easily control these systems to some extent. Although leakages are always happening, again, the degree to which they get leaked out is in large measure contained. But to take what I'm saying at least even somewhat realistically, to take it at least somewhat seriously, I feel that you have to read a fair bit of literature on these matters. Out from the smallmouth land.